What's up, YouTube? I'm David Warren, and welcome back to this week's video. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. This is all about being a nurse practitioner and being a CRNA student. Today, I have the opportunity to interview the administration of Wilderness Medical Staffing. They are the locums company that I've contracted with over the past 5 years to do my assignments in remote Alaska. Today, I get to talk to Mary Ellen Doty, who is the founder and nurse practitioner at Wilderness Medical Staffing. And then I get to talk to Noah McWilliams and Ethan McWilliams, who are both the co-CEOs of the company. We're going to talk all about their company, the start of the company, their visions, their goals, but we're also going to focus on some clinical aspects as well from Mary Ellen, who is, as I said earlier, a nurse practitioner and who's worked in these remote environments. We're going to talk about what you need to know about being a travel nurse practitioner in these areas, what kind of experience you need, what to expect on assignments, and everything that goes into being a nurse practitioner in a remote environment. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview. All right, guys, we're live. Thank you all so much for agreeing to do this and taking time out of your busy schedules. Before we really dive into the interview, I would like for each of you just to go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about you and your professional background. And Mary Ellen, we can go and start with you.
Thank you, David. I'm Mary Ellen Doty, a founder of Wilderness Medical Staffing, and I'm a nurse practitioner, have been a nurse practitioner for 8 years now. And much of that, 19 years of that in Alaska. So that's me.
I'll go next. I'm Noah, and I'm actually Mary Ellen's son. We can get more into that later. But I am the CEO / part owner over here at Wilderness. And boy, my background, I was going into kind of the criminal justice field, ended up getting my master's in criminal justice and was going to go into law enforcement. Spent some time doing criminal justice research and took part in a few studies. And then Mary Ellen convinced me to come to the dark side and join Wilderness Medical Staffing back in 2014, and been doing that ever since.
And thank you again, David, for having us. I'm Ethan McWilliams, Noah's brother, also the co-CEO. I came at Wilderness also from a different career set. I went to undergrad and straight from undergrad into law school and had a very conventional legal career. I was a judge advocate in the U.S. Army on active duty for 6 years. I lived in Korea and Germany and Africa. And then I transitioned into the reserves and was a prosecutor and an assistant attorney general here in Washington. And in 2019, I was speaking with Noah. I was kind of looking to make a change, and it just happened to be that the stars aligned. I was able to come join the company, and the rest is history, as they say.
That is so interesting. You all have such varied, I can obviously understand how Mary Ellen ended up here, but both of you guys have such varied careers, and that's so cool that you have since all joined forces. And I know it makes Mary Ellen so proud to have both of you guys there beside her. So that's really interesting. So tell me a little bit about your professional roles now at Wilderness. So obviously, Mary Ellen, you founded the company, and kind of take us through a little bit about that, just to kind of start with.
About founding the company, David?
How Wilderness started and how that kind of came to be.
How Wilderness Medical Staffing started was I was, as you know, a nurse practitioner in Alaska for 19 years. And most of that, honestly, was bush Alaska, by definition, off the road system. And so I could see that not in every location, but in a disproportionate amount of or number of locations, the medical care just wasn't very good. Either people had been there for 20 years and just had not been had the opportunity to get out and refresh themselves, or there was no care at all. So I could see the need. And I also had a group of girlfriends, honestly, who said, yeah, I'm tired of working my full-time job. I'd love to just work a month on, month off. And so the idea was born.
That is awesome, because I can resonate with what your friend said. I found myself in that situation in late 2017, of being just kind of burnout and really tired of a full-time job. And for those of you watching this video who may not know me, I'm David Warren, and I'm a nurse practitioner, and I've contracted with Wilderness now for about 5 years and going on different assignments in Alaska. And I really found myself in that situation in 2017, being really burnt out and wanting something different. And that's really cool of how that started, because I think most people that do locums find themselves in that situation saying, I'm a little burnt out, I want to do something different. And that's cool that about how you kind of made that happen. So talk to me a little bit about your roles now at Wilderness Medical Staffing, and kind of what that looks like now. Like what is your day kind of look like, and what are your, not necessarily your tasks, but kind of what does your day look like at Wilderness? We go to start with you, Mary Ellen.
Well, my role has decreased some. As you know, David, when you start a small business, pretty much you do everything. And certainly that was what Noah and I did for years, is we kind of did everything. So now, thanks to these two wonderful guys on the screen here, I don't have to do that. And my role at this point in time is Chief Medical Officer. So mostly a typical day would be to interview providers. I'm kind of the last stop on the block, if you will, before we actually onboard someone. And then just some consulting and helping out here and there. But that's kind of what a typical day for me would look like.
Okay, that's cool. And what about you, Noah?
Yeah, as Mariel said, we used to just do everything, which is funny. It's like when you're a small business, you just, you do everything, probably to a substandard fashion. But now it's great. We've got this excellent team. So I can spend most of my time working forward and looking at, the vision of the company, strategy, business development. And those are kind of the big ones that I work on. So I'm working on our quarterly, yearly plans on a weekly basis. I'm focused ahead, and I don't have to do a lot of the contract, and travel arrangements and stuff, all that stuff that we used to have to do. So that's kind of what I focus my time on now.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about you, Ethan?
Yeah, pretty similar to Noah. We have split up a fair number of the clients, so we each handle different areas of the business in a similar fashion. The thing that I do as well is a lot of the compliance stuff. As you know, every time we send someone out on an assignment, there's legal paperwork associated with it, whether it be the rate sheet or the contract. And then just industry-wide, company-wide, there's a lot of compliance as well that goes in. So the biggest, of course, would be medical malpractice insurance. So I tend to be the liaison with our professional liability insurance broker and the insurer themselves, and just making sure all that is running smoothly so the assignments can happen as planned.
Okay, that makes sense. I find your legal career so interesting, because it's so varied from what a typical, somebody in healthcare would look like. And talk to me a little bit about kind of your training in law, and do you feel like that adequately prepared you for like where you are now, or do you feel like you've picked up a lot of stuff kind of as you have onboarded with Wilderness, or how has that transition been for you?
Yeah, I think I guess first and foremost, when I did what every good person does these days and posted my job transition on LinkedIn, I think a lot of people are like, what? Like, because I had a very conventional career, again, the military, working in government, and then all of a sudden I'm going a different direction. It's been really invigorating for me to work with a small team and contribute to like building something that has become a real passion of mine, that I honestly didn't fully appreciate until I was in the work. As far as like how my background helps me or prepared me, I think the biggest thing I take from my my prior work is just a mindset of analysis and looking at problems and researching issues. I came into this with a lot of humility about the work that these guys were doing and that just goes into the industry. And so I've really endeavored to learn as much as I can over the last 3 years, both from the providers that we work with every day, but also these guys who are here with us today. And so it's been equal parts like, hey, I've encountered a problem like this, maybe we could try this sort of thing. But and then the other side of the coin is, hey, I got to go self-educate. And often what I do is coordinate with legal professionals in the field and say, hey, I know enough to know that I need help with this. What should we be looking at? And yeah, so I'd say on the whole, it's prepared me to a degree, but every day can bring some new challenge that never could have been anticipated. So a big part of it is just kind of staying flexible and knowing your limits and being able to ask for help. So
Sure. No, I totally get that. And that's cool that you've made such a varied career change. I'm sure to go from one, a typical career sector to another, it's different and it's a learning experience, I'm sure. So, so obviously you've got Wilderness Medical Staff. You guys are a locums company. And so we've kind of gathered a little bit about that. Talk to me a little bit about where you guys staff and kind of, whenever at least for me, when I was looking into being a travel nurse practitioner, whenever you just do a simple Google search on locums companies, you're hit with just, I don't know how many different companies out there. And, they're smaller to large, and some staff kind of all over the United States and some staff in smaller areas. So kind of talk to me about what you guys do and where you staff and just kind of what you do as a company.
Noah, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So we are, as a locum tenens company, we primarily focus on locum tenens. We do some permanent staffing as well. But we are dedicated to staffing rural and remote areas. And so that's what really, I think, that's one of the differentiators between us and some of the other companies out there. We staff in Alaska and the Northwest. So Washington, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, now Oregon. And so those are the areas that we staff when we staff NPs, PAs, and physicians. We're really ramping up our physician staffing a lot over the last year or so. And then primarily because of the areas that we staff in the niche we kind of found ourselves in, we primarily staff primary care, emergency medicine, urgent care, some internal medicine. So those are primarily the specialties that we staff within that. But yeah, that's just as a very high level overview. That's what we do.
Okay, that makes sense. And that your answer kind of segues into another segment that I'm going to talk about soon, but I have one question for you before we start. And so, like I said earlier, whenever I was looking into my travel career, there are just a million locums companies that come up. And I've had the opportunity to contract with different locums companies down in the lower 48. And obviously I've contracted with you guys for several years as well. So I would love to hear from each of you on this. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what really sets you apart from the other locums companies that are out there. What in your opinion, what do you guys do well and what really sets you apart? And Mary Ellen, I would love to hear from you first on that.
Okay, well, I think what sets us apart is that we're grassroots, for one thing. It started because I happened to be in the field. I happened to see that the care that was being given was, could be improved greatly. I knew that we could do a better job, let's put it that way. And so I think that really sets us apart. We've physically worked in many of the places that we staff. And certainly I've worked in many places in Bush, Alaska, as well as rural Montana and Washington as well. So I think that's important. And then the other thing that's important is I feel that we know who we are. I feel that we know our niche and where we do a good job and who we are and who we are not. Mm-hmm. And then I'll let the guys take it from there.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Noah, I'd like to hear from you next.
Yeah, one thing that as part of our broad strategy and what we really focus on, we call our 4 differentiators at Wilderness Medical Staffing. It's small town service, local knowledge, providers that pass the family test, and rural specialists. So the rural specialist is what Mary Ellen was talking about. Is we know who we are. We know what we do. That's what we're all about, is providing excellent healthcare to rural and remote areas. Local knowledge being that we've lived in a lot of these areas that we staff. We've worked in a lot. I'm talking about Mary Ellen contracting all over the state of Alaska, Montana. We've lived in a lot of these areas. Ethan and I grew up in a remote Alaskan village. And we pride ourselves on gaining that intimate knowledge, that firsthand knowledge of each of the locations we staff. The small town service, we basically, that's what we hang our hat on. So we want to go above and beyond, providing the best service out there. And then the providers that pass the family test, we always talk about that, right? Like, we staff a provider, and it's like, would you want this provider to take care of your family? And that's kind of how that's the lens we look at it. And so we always want to work with the best of the best, because what we do really matters. So those are the 4 kind of pillars that we sort of hang our hat on, and we feel like differentiate us from the rest of the pack.
Okay, no, that definitely makes sense. And what about you, Ethan?
Yeah, Noah summed it up quite well. The one thing I'd say in addition to that is that we are very hungry for feedback. So we make a very deliberate and intentional point of talking to providers throughout the process to get a sense of what their experience is with our service, because we know, frankly, we can get better. There's a lot of different things that we can do as a company to improve. And so, hopefully you will have seen these and experienced this yourself firsthand, David, but when we send someone out on assignment, before you leave, you're getting an email from me. And then you're getting opportunities before, during, and after an assignment to tell us, and those emails go directly to Noah, myself, and Mary Ellen, to tell us how your experience has been, what could be done to improve it. And that helps generate a feedback loop where we're able to intervene and help assignments that are maybe going the wrong direction. We can help set them right. And I think that offers a best in industry experience for the provider out in the field, and certainly that's what we're striving for.
And the company was, sorry, David. And the company was founded by a medical provider, and as a medical provider heading the company, we're very much, Mary Ellen's very much involved in directing kind of the direction of the company, and we always want to stay kind of keep our identity, with that kind of identity, that provider founded and company mindset. So I think that's another thing that really sets us apart.
Sure. No, I agree with everything you've said, because it's interesting that obviously Mary Ellen founded the company and you've worked in these areas, you know what it's like. And I think a lot of recruiters that I've worked with in the past don't really understand that and don't really know kind of what, you're kind of pushing people through. And I think you guys do a good job at, taking care of your providers and following up and all the things that you mentioned. So that kind of leads me into the next section that I want to focus on. And I've had, over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to kind of document my experience in Alaska and the areas that I've worked in. And it's been, when I first started, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And it was a little terrifying, to say the least. And there's some still moments that make you stand on your feet and, realize where you are. But as Noah mentioned earlier, kind of the areas you guys staff are a little bit of everything. So primary care, internal medicine, emergency medicine. You see most other locums companies kind of focus on a particular area, but I think that's the difference in Alaska is you kind of have to do everything under one roof. And so I would love to hear from you, Mary Ellen. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the environment in remote Alaska and kind of what a typical day might look like. For the people that have seen my videos, people know kind of what that looks like, but it's so interesting to hear from somebody else who's also been there and who's also worked in those areas. What does that day kind of look like for you?
Well, as you know, David, a typical day, I don't know how to even answer that, because most days are so varied. And I think that's one of the exciting things about working in that environment is that we don't know. We don't know what's going to walk in the door. We know that the more prepared we are, the better outcomes we have and the better we do. But you could be set for a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and then take call every night, and be a sole provider, and someone will walk in the door or be carried in the door from a huge trauma, or having a baby, or having a big MI. And so, typical day is hard to describe there. But for those sole provider sites, it's challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding, because the difference is, the difference we make in people's lives is very apparent. And so I guess that's all I could say about that. We do staff, of course, some larger areas, some typical clinics, let's say in Juneau or what have you, that are going to look exactly like a clinic in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
But then we also staff quite a few critical access hospitals, and those also are very challenging. Normally, it's a solo provider side, or possibly one other provider, and responsible for anything that comes in that emergency room door to evaluate, triage, and then get them to a higher level of care.
Sure. No, I completely understand that as well. And I think that's one of the interesting things about working in Alaska is, it's not typical. There's nothing typical about being in anywhere in a healthcare setting, and at least in some of the remote parts of Alaska. Oftentimes you are one of the only provider, if not the only provider there. During the day, you're obviously working clinic, and then in the evenings, if you're on call, you probably are the only provider, and you and a nurse or a paramedic would be the one responding at night. And so what would you say, Mary Ellen, is kind of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of being in those environments?
Sure. Well, the most challenging probably would be weather, and that applies to Montana and Alaska and our other sites as well, honestly. But so weather, if you're, you get someone in, they need to go to a higher level of care, but you can't get them out. The medevac plane can't get there. There's no way to transport. So that is the most challenging situation I've been in Alaska, where you have to stabilize and, keep that person alive and as well as you can while you get them to a higher level of care. So that would be the most challenging situation I can think of. What was the other one?
What would you say is like the most rewarding? What's like the best?
The most rewarding. Oh, by far the most rewarding is the relationships that I have with the people in those villages, or in the towns where I work. I mean, it could be a small town in Montana, or it could be a village in Alaska, or a small town in Washington, or one of our other states for that matter. But it's the relationships that I make. I mean, honestly, just from direct experience, it's the relationships that I make with those people. And some of the cultures are very different than my own. Athabascan cultures, or Haida Tlingit culture, that type of thing. And those are just, I feel privileged to ever experience something like that, because I don't think many people do get to do that. So.
Yeah, I agree. There are many varied cultures, and that's really neat to be able to. It's almost like a once in a lifetime type experience to be able to go there and to interact and to make a difference in those lives. So I want to ask kind of two different questions here. I polled my audience on YouTube and on Instagram about what kind of questions should I ask? And the overwhelming majority was, what kind of providers are you guys looking for? Like, who is best suited to come to this environment and to succeed and to thrive? So Mary Ellen, I would love to hear, like, clinically, what do you guys look for? And then for Ethan and Noah, like, non-clinical attributes and providers, what do you guys look for as well? And Mary Ellen, you can go ahead and go first.
Well, I can go ahead and start with the clinical aspect of that. Of course, we want someone who's has a lot of experience in emergency medicine. If they are to go to a solo provider site, we simply won't staff an area with someone who does not have the background and the experience to be handling those situations. So experience and plenty of emergency experience, primary care, urgent care experience, of course, is wonderful to have, but we honestly hardly ever can take a new grad. They just need to have some experience under their belt before we could take them. So the other thing and personality wise would be, they need to be flexible. These sites that we staff are not typical. They're not what they're going to run into in a larger urban medical setting. So the provider needs to be flexible and of course personable, because what matters in those small places are the personal relationships. And I think Ethan and Noah can probably add to that if I've forgotten anything.
Yeah, I would love to hear kind of I know clinically what's needed in in those environments, but like what do you guys look for just in a person? What kind of things are like, this is the ideal provider, this is who I want to send to these areas?
Yeah. Ethan, go for it if you want to take it.
Yeah, sure. One thing I can share on this, David, is that we did a new thing last year. We surveyed all of our clients across the footprint in which we work. We asked them this very question: what makes someone succeed when they're out on assignment with you? And a couple of the overwhelmingly prevalent answers were someone who's flexible, like Mary Ellen just mentioned, and someone who's just a team player, because oftentimes as a locum, you're thrust into a new situation with a bunch of people that you may not know. If you approach that situation from a purely transactional mindset, I'm just here to make a little extra money and then I'm going to be gone. And that attitude, I think, can rub people the wrong way and lead to assignments being more challenging maybe than they needed to be. And then when things do really get difficult, which can sometimes happen in a healthcare setting, it's harder to work together. So from our perspective and that of our clients, being a team player is a really, really important part of it. And having the patience and flexibility to go into maybe a rural Alaska Native village or a small town in Montana, and to be able to be adaptable and forgiving towards those around you, and really try to work on building relationships. I think one of the lessons learned from our perspective has been that most assignments don't go wrong because of clinical issues. We're pretty good. We're very good at sorting through who's good, who has the requisite experience, all of that. But if something goes wrong, it's usually on the personality side. And so from our perspective, that's one of the most important things that a provider can bring to a community is that kind of team player attitude.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I agree. Just being in that environment, and you definitely have to be a team player, because you're obviously going to run into different personality types, and the rural areas tend to be, it's just a different environment, and you definitely have to be willing to have an open mind, because whenever you go there, at least clinically, you might do things differently than you would in another area, and that doesn't mean it's wrong. You just have to have an open mind about it. What about you, Noah?
Boy, I think that Ethan and Mary Ellen just hit the nail on the head on with their answers. I think they pretty much covered it. I'm just, with all of that kind of wrapped in together, again, I think that I'm just looking for what I would call like an A player provider, which is, they've got the skills, the experience, the certifications, but then that personality side of it as well. So all, we kind of look for the total package. And at the end of the day, I'm just, as I said before, would I want this person to see my family? Would I want them to take care of my boys? And that's kind of what if there's one, if that's the last question, right? It's like they've got to be able to pass that. So, but otherwise, I think they hit it.
Sure. No, that all makes sense as well. So kind of going back to the clinical experience. So obviously good emergency medicine skills. What about for somebody who maybe doesn't have that? What kind of things can they do to maybe get ready and, within a year or within a few years be ready to say, okay, I want to do this assignment. what can they be doing like in the meantime to try to get that experience? And Mary Ellen, you can obviously answer the clinical question.
Sure. Well, first of all, we do have positions where the provider, a good primary care provider or urgent care provider, would do very well, because it's not a solo provider side. There are emergency rooms, next door, or there are other experienced providers there who take that piece of it. So we do have those positions available. But if someone wanted to go do what you've done, David, which is go out to the bush and be on call by themselves, that kind of thing, the really only thing that they can do is get experience. And by that I mean actually be in a small hospital, not in necessarily a large hospital, unless that large hospital is willing to let them actually do main track ER. But the fast track ER doesn't allow them to have the kind of experiences that they need out there. So the person needs to get some direct experience in the ER, and honestly, in my experience, a couple of years minimum. It's not fun being in a situation where you're over your head and you're out there by yourself. So it's something that people have to, they have to be seasoned, mature and seasoned.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I found that out just in the very first assignment that I went on with you guys. The first day I was there, a lady came in like septic shock, and we had to start vasopressors on her and intubate her. And it was like I was in the ER in downtown Dallas managing these sick complex patients. And then the very next patient you go into has an upper respiratory infection or has low back pain or something very simple. And so I think that for me is one of the really cool things about working in Alaska is the variety. You go from somebody who is literally dying in front of you to somebody who maybe just needs some anticipatory guidance or needs like an annual health check or something like that. And I think that's so cool. It's so easy to get, at least in like a full-time job in the lower 48, to get so focused on your specialty and what you're doing that you don't get a chance to kind of branch out. And in Alaska, you really get that opportunity to branch out and to do some really cool stuff that you probably wouldn't get to do otherwise. So let's say someone is watching this video and they want to go on assignment with you guys. They're interested in this. They go to your website and they apply. Kind of talk us through what the next steps would be after somebody expresses interest in going on assignments, and whoever wants can take this question.
Yeah, I'll take this one, David. Yeah, so the way this would work is I kind of think of it as 3 phases. So in the first phase, we would get to know the person and collect all of their relevant documents, get a sense of what their experience level is, have them complete our application. And then we have an interview. They would probably speak with Mary Ellen, who's on here, in a one-on-one setting where she would be able to go through their experience and comfort level in different clinical settings. That's a really important part of our process. But basically, kind of consider the first phase like an onboarding sort of thing where we're getting to know you and you're getting to know us. Once we've done that and established that we're a good fit for one another, we would then have you look at any open assignments that we have. And sometimes we'd work ahead as well. So if we think you're a great fit for an assignment that could be coming down the pike eventually, we'd get you introduced to the person who manages that account. So that way you'd be ready. But in that kind of second phase, we're just looking for a good fit between the client facility and the provider. And once we are able to match make there, we'd move into the third phase, which is all about getting you out on assignment. And as you know from personal experience, there's a lot of details that go into, okay, I've accepted the job, they've accepted me. Making that a reality is a really multi-part process. And so that's where our operations team would kick in. They work on getting your flights coordinated, making sure you have a good lodging situation, et cetera. All of the things behind the scenes that make an assignment possible. So those are kind of the three phases that we would look at this part of the process.
Okay, that also kind of segues into my next question. So obviously there's travel nursing as well, and there are quite a few, obviously lots of travel nurses who do that for a living, and that's a little bit different than being a provider. So you had mentioned that you talked about flights and lodging. So talk to me a little bit about kind of what's included whenever you send a provider on assignment. What would they be responsible for? Are they responsible for their own flights or for their lodging, or kind of what would a provider be responsible for? I'll have you take that question.
Muted myself. Yeah. So anytime we get someone signed up for an assignment, as Ethan mentioned, we've got an operations team that would then, as soon as the assignment's in place and they're accepted for position, the operations team gets to work, and we cover travel, lodging, that we get the contracts in place. We start working on their credentialing at the facility. We do all of that through our operations department, and we cover malpractice insurance for every assignment with the providers. So they're never no providers are never have to worry about, arranging travel or lodging, or and all of those expenses are paid as well. So they don't have to worry about any of that. It's all communicated from our operations department with them. A lot of times our operations department will communicate with the provider on preferences for travel and things like that as well. So we take care of everything as far as that goes.
Okay. And yeah, that's super interesting, because I have quite a few friends who are travel nurses, and it's definitely different on the nursing side. And so when people have watched some of my videos kind of documenting my experience, are like, oh, that's so interesting that flights are paid for and you get lodging. So there are definitely perks to having the locums life and traveling, in those rural areas. So kind of talk to me a little bit about what providers need to bring with them. Like, what are some, I know whenever I first, and some of these questions just kind of come from me personally, whenever I went on assignment, I didn't really know. It's like, what do you bring? What are some like essential type items that you would need on assignment? And I think Mary Ellen, you might be best suited to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you. Well, David, as you know, it kind of depends on the season, especially when we're talking, because we do Northwest and Alaska. So those seasons are dramatically different one from another. So if you're talking winter in Alaska, many of the bush planes require that you have Arctic gear, meaning, that type of clothing that is good to 40 or 50 or below to even get on the bush plane. So there's that, and of course, then if it's summertime and it's in a Southeast Alaska, which is very rainy, it would have to be rain gear and that kind of thing. And those are just the personal items. Dress tends to be casual, if you will, in the not, I would say business casual, just a nice lab coat. And I always take my own stethoscope. Some providers, we have some providers that actually, have their own ultrasound. They'll take it with them, or their own intubation equipment. I have providers who do that, not necessary, but certainly if that's what they're comfortable with, they'd be welcome to do that. But one thing I would like to say is that our account executives who will be setting those positions up, and in more particularly, the operations team have all that information down for each site. We're very careful to have information for each site so that there are no surprises once they get there. I mean, they'll have that information for them. I hope that answers your question. Maybe these guys can chime in here.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I agree. With every assignment that I have been on, the account executives, Diane or Tanner or somebody does a very good job at sending out an email, kind of wrapping up on. And I always look for that because I need to make sure I have my flights, signed in appropriately on my phone and everything. So I think you guys do a really good job at that as well. So
Hey,
kind of this. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, David. I just wanted to put a plug in there. We almost a year ago exactly, we hired someone to handle our marketing stuff, and she's truly put a bunch of energy into this stuff. So if you've been to our website, you'll see like now we've got a blog and a lot more in the form of resources for providers. And this is a question we hear a lot. We recently had a blog which covered this very question, like looking at, hey, I'm going to on an assignment to XYZ location, what should I take with me? And so there's some really fun content in there about this very question. So if people are kind of curious, that would be another good resource that we'd point them towards.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. And that's on your website, you said?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up as well. I believe that it's specific to the one we just released article was specific to Alaska assignments, but it's got a full packing checklist on it and everything. So yeah,
nice.
if you go to our website, that's on there.
Okay, awesome. That's very good information to know as well. So kind of this last section that I want to talk to you about is kind of the business side of wilderness medical staffing. And obviously as a provider starting out a few years ago, like I said earlier, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and the tax laws and the business laws are different, whenever you are not an employee. And so the providers that work with you guys are contracted. Is that correct? So they're 1099.
Yep. All of them.
Everybody's 1099. So talk to me a little bit about kind of the business side of wilderness. Whenever I met you guys all in 2017, you were much smaller. And I think Noah was arranging my travel and doing my assignments and sending rate sheets out. And obviously you guys have grown a little bit since then. So talk to me a little bit about over the past few years, what kind of changes have been implemented within the company? And whoever, any of you, I would love maybe hear from each of you on that. I'm sure you all have a different perspective.
There's been a lot of changes in the last, it's been 5 years since you came on board with us. A lot of changes. We built an excellent team. There's a couple people that I think were around back then, Diane and Susan, some of our excellent account executives. So they're still with us. But we just really just focus on building an excellent internal team as well to help support the providers and hospitals more effectively. Ethan jumped on board in 2019. I think that's probably the biggest change that we were able to make, convincing him to jump on board with us. And he's got an excellent business mind. So we've done a ton since he's come on board a few years back. I would say those are some of the biggest things. We also, we've added new states. So I think back in 2017, I can't remember exactly where we were at. I think we were staffing Alaska, Montana, Washington. We've added some new states. We just started last year staffing Wyoming. So that's a lot of fun. And we're just working through the process to staff Oregon as well. So that's kind of the next challenge. So yeah, we've added new states. We've added a lot of people to the mix. I don't know, Ethan, Mary Ellen, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I can speak to, if you want to go way back, I can speak to, starting the company with carrying around boxes of charts and, paper contracts. And and when Noah came on, he was like, but that's how small we were and how far we've come, thanks to Noah and Ethan, honestly.
That's really cool. And what about you, Ethan? It's been a couple of years since you've been on board. What kind of changes have you seen just maybe within the past couple of years? I would assume COVID has changed some things for you guys. What would you say has kind of happened over the past few years?
Yeah, it's I late to the party, obviously, joining in 2019, but yeah, I'd say the biggest things, COVID was a real turn. I think I must have been at the company about 9 months as that really got fully into swing. That required us to really fundamentally look at the way the company worked and our clients, and had to really go back to the basics. And our team just really came together during COVID. So that Noah's emphasis on the internal team, I think that's really by far the biggest development. The one other thing I would say is that we've always had a lot of interest from physicians in the kind of work that we offer as a company. Over the last couple of years, we've put more and more resources into finding opportunities for those people to be able to participate as well. And so I shared this with you before we got started, David. My wife is a physician. And so just, being able to hear through her experiences, what kind of work people are looking for. And then we've got a great set of clients that we work with who also need physician help. That's been a big change, particularly over the last year or two, where we have many more opportunities that we're able to offer to those folks.
Sure, no, that makes sense as well. And I've seen some physician listings on your website. It's been a while since I've looked, but I think that's super interesting because in some of the areas I've worked in Alaska, I've had the opportunity to kind of cross paths with physicians. And I think it's really cool whenever you get to meet different providers that are in Alaska, because most of the assignments you go on, you might be the only person, or there might be another person that's there for a couple days before you leave, before they leave and you come on. And so it is really cool to get to work with different providers. And I think our physician colleagues bring so much to the table, along with our PA colleagues and the NPs as well. So I think that's it's really cool, at least for me, to be able to run across different providers in those environments too. So every business kind of has that growth mindset. So looking forward in like 5 to 10 years, where do you see yourself? What's your vision for the company? And I would like to hear from each of you on that.
Do you want to start, Ethan, or do you want me to jump in?
Why don't you take it first and then I'll pile on.
Sure. I think we've all got the same vision for the company. I hope we're aligned on this. If we're not, then we might be in trouble. But so feel free to jump in, guys, after. But our long range goal, our BHAG, which is Jim Collins' phrase, it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? So our big long term goal, way out there, is to be the leading locum tenens agency for rural and remote areas globally. That's our long range goal, right? But how do you achieve that, right? So we always look 3 years out, and I find that like 5 to 10 year goals are just a little bit too far out. You can't really strategize for that. You can't really reach out and touch it. It's a little bit too far away to really strategize around. So we focus on 3 years out. We call it our 3HAG, 3-year highly achievable goal. But our 3-year goal is to be the leading locum tenens agency for rural and remote areas in the Northwest in Alaska. So that's our 3-year goal. And we've set up all our strategy and planning around that. We've got everything listed out. We know exactly the initiatives we're going to do every quarter for the next 12 quarters to hit that 3-year goal. So we've done a lot of work on that. Mary Ellen, Ethan, and I, and the rest of our leadership team has really been instrumental in that as well, helping us work on that. So that's what our 3-year goal is, and so I think that we really are there in Alaska. I think we have a huge market share in Montana as well. Now the rest of the Northwest, we're still, it's a work in progress, and we'll just keep plugging.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about Ethan and Mary Ellen? Do you guys have anything to add?
Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I'll just tack on a little bit there. I think Noah mentioned globally. I think long term, so we're talking 10 to 25 years from now, we would like to do the same work that we're able to do now, with that special focus on rural and remote, to be able to do that internationally. We think that would be a great fit for the skill sets we have on our internal team, and just frankly the interest we get from providers like you who want to come work with us. We think there's a lot of overlap there. So I'd say that's kind of the vision. The other thing that I feel is important to mention in this context is the things that we've chosen not to do. I think that's one of my lessons learned coming from the public sector into the private sector. There are so many opportunities that we're confronted with in a given week or month or year, all of which have their own merits. I think what has been really instrumental for us as a company, we have to work on this all the time. It's not like we got it all figured out, but is having the confidence to believe in our strategy and say no to things that may help the bottom line or show some promise, but aren't our identity as a company. We were founded by a provider to service rural and remote areas, and we're hyper committed to staying in that lane and doing it the best we can. So that's the other thing that came to mind with your question, David.
Yeah, those are some awesome aspirations you guys have, and I hope to be around to continue to go on assignments with you when that happens, because that would be fantastic. And what about you, Mary Ellen? Do you have anything else to add?
Well, I just, I would just double down on everything that Noah and Ethan said. I think one thing that's been so important for me is that, as you probably know, David, I've been in medicine all my life. So I've never been a business person. I'm still not. But with Noah and Ethan, they really are. And so we're able to actually do that 3-year vision and then farther down. But with the 3-year vision being attainable and tangible, if you will, staying in those lanes that actually get us to where our 3-year, and you can see it happen, quarter, we've got a quarter, and then we break that down into months, if you will. And so that's really comforting for me, is just to have that container. It happens with some boundaries and kind of in a container. That's the way I look at it. But I think it's made a beautiful combination to have, yes, this company was started by a medical provider. Could I have taken this very far? Probably not without these guys and their backgrounds and experience.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. So kind of on the business side of things, just from my experience in Alaska and even healthcare in general, relationships are kind of one of the first thing that comes to mind. And whenever I first go on assignment, or whenever I first go to a new place to work, even if it's not on a locums assignment, I think it's super important to form those lasting relationships, even if you're only going to be there maybe for a few weeks or for just a season of your life. So kind of talk to me about kind of what your personal thoughts are, kind of what your personal goals are on forming those lasting relationships with the places that you guys staff. Obviously, that's that initial contact, or whoever reaches out first, talking about staffing, either you guys or them, to find out about what services you offer. Kind of talk about that lasting relationship that you guys have and the importance of that. And either whoever wants to go first can take on that question.
Go for it, Ethan.
I think it's a great question, David. One of the paradoxes that emerged to me pretty early on when I joined the company was, on one hand, the industry at large is very transactional, where we agree on a rate, I send someone out, they come back, and then it's all about that kind of basic transaction. But one of the beautiful insights that I learned from working with these guys, especially Mary Ellen, is that even though that's the default, you can transcend that and transform it by really leaning in to the relational aspect of the business. And that's especially true with us because of the clients that we work with, the client facilities we work with in rural and remote communities. If you live in a small town or a village, relationships are a huge part of your everyday life. And doing business with someone is not simply some casual transactional thing. You want to get to know them and know what their family's about. And from the earliest days of the company, that was a focal point, and it's something we've always tried to come back to. One of the things that all three of us do is each week or every other week, we try to make a point to call one provider out in the field, one person at a facility out in the field, just to maintain or build those relationships, but also to give us insight into what's going on out in the field, because Noah and I aren't providers. And we work with providers every day, but it's very important for us to have an understanding what's going on. So those relationships are very fundamental to the business, and something that we plan our schedule. We almost view them as strategic. I think the relationships is being something that have to be developed and maintained over time. So very important.
No, that definitely makes sense as well. Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
Oh, and Mary Ellen was saying, she could have never grown the business without us. The fact of the matter is, this business could have never started without her. With her, if I tried to start this business, it wouldn't have lifted off. And that's due to the fact that she was building those relationships over, the better part of 20 years in Alaska and Montana. And she had really nurtured some of those relationships, and so when she went to go start this business, it was she just got on the phone with a couple, she called some people she knew at the different clinics, and she was able to get it going because they trusted her, because she had worked with them and developed those relationships. And we couldn't have done that. So we couldn't have started this business without her. And so, yeah, it's vital. And a lot of our business that we get are referral based. So on the hospital side, the clinic side, a lot of the business that we've gotten over the years has been because these, CEOs at hospitals know one another. They talk and they say, "Hey, who are you using for locum tenens staffing?" And then they say, "Oh, well, Wilderness," and so that's how then they contact us, right? And that's how we get in. The same thing is true on the provider side. A lot of providers love to work with us, and they talk to their friends, and their friends say, "Hey, who would you go out with?" "Well, I go with Wilderness." And so it's a referral thing on both sides, I think, is how we keep this thing going, and it's all based on relationships.
Yeah, the relationships are super important. And I know just from myself, sometimes whenever you're working, it's easy to get that kind of burnt out feeling, and you never want that to be transferred over to a patient. And whenever you're working, at least in an inner city emergency department or an inner city clinic or wherever you may be, you're seeing 15, 20 something people per shift, and it can be a lot. And I've found whenever working in Alaska and you're seeing those patients, there are some patients that travel great distances, to see you as the only provider. And, I've had people travel, they take a boat, several hours away, and then they get in a car and drive a couple more hours to the clinic, for their appointment to see you. And that might be the first time they've been to the clinic in over a year. And so I think that's really cool to form those relationships with the patients. And I've found, even working in Alaska, that whenever you're just talking, having normal conversation with people at the store or with patients, they have lives, and it's so interesting to hear the stories that those people have, because they're unlike any other story that you will probably hear anywhere in the United States. So thank you all so much for agreeing to do this with me. I do have one last question for you. So I found myself in this situation several years ago before I started locums, and that is, it's super easy to think like, this is something I want to do. I want this life for myself. I want to travel. I want to have freedom of schedule. But sometimes it's hard to take that jump. And whenever I started in 2017, I was in the ER, and I had to turn in a 120-day notice before, to quit. And so I remember going to my medical director and turning in that notice and thinking, what am I doing with my life? And, to look back these years later and to see what cool things have happened, what would you say to somebody who's like on the brink of wanting to do locums? What advice would you have for them? Mary Ellen, you can go ahead and go first.
Sure. Well, it happens all the time. And what I do say to most people is, do you have a 4-week vacation to try it? Maybe, maybe you want to keep that day job. Maybe you want to keep that, 1 foot in security while you go out there and try this. Or, and we do have providers who do that, who work full-time jobs, and then they'll either take vacation or leaves of absence or what have you, and and go do that. The other thing, of course, is that, the pay is always excellent. And I can't remember a time at Wilderness Medical Staffing when we didn't have positions open. So you guys go ahead and take it away then too.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me now, obviously, I've never been in that situation. I think there's a lot of value in finding people who have, like you, David, going to your channel and seeing the videos and getting a sense for what it's like to be on the ground and having to confront all these challenges, because those are the things that I think can be really challenging when someone makes the adjustment. Is like, oh, I didn't even have to consider this problem, and here I am confronting it. So for me, the way I would answer the question is to just look at the preparation stuff. There are some books. I don't think there are enough books about our industry, but there are some things you can read about people who've gone on the road and practice medicine, as a locum, and what their experiences have been. There are videos you can watch. That would be the big thing for me, is just understanding what the lifestyle really brings with it. And then the other thing I'd say is understand the things that are very important to you and non-negotiable to you. So the biggest questions we get all the time are about pets and family members or children. It's totally okay to have those things. They may or may not limit the number of assignments that are available to you depending on the location you'd want to work, but just understand what your requirements are for a position. So that way, once you go down the path of looking at positions, you're able to kind of lay out what's really important to you. It's important that my family member be able to come with me, or it's important that my dog or cat be able to come with me. So that way you're operating with a clear picture of what's possible and what isn't right from the get-go, and avoid any confusion. I think that would be an important way to approach it as well.
Yeah, I would just say, to kind of piggyback on that, I think we've got a lot of good information on our website. I would say just maybe start there. Start Googling some videos about it. I know you've got a lot of great stuff, David, and I would just kind of look at, try to absorb some content, start looking at it. You can give our team a call too. If you're interested in locums work, give us a call. We will never push you into try to, push you into, jumping in and taking an assignment or whatever. We're all about, if you're looking for work, and what's your availability? What do you, what are your preferences? And we kind of try to understand kind of what you're looking for. And if now is not the right time, we'll at least, our team can provide whatever information you're looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I often tell people, David, no is a perfectly acceptable answer. If this assignment doesn't fit you, and we'll ask again if you like. If you want us to call you, we'll continue to do that until we find something for you. But no is a fine answer.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you guys all so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this interview. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm excited. I'm excited to share it with everyone, so people can see what it's like working with you guys. So thank you for that.
Hey, thank you, David.
Thank you guys so much for joining in and watching this video today. Drop a comment below. Let me know what follow-up questions you have for either myself or for Wilderness Medical Staffing. I'll get those passed along. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.